It's worth noting, so you say, now how did a firm like AMLI, that it had, in '83, we were 2 years old, and we had one development deal, one, Soap Creek. You couldn't anymore do this today than the man in the moon. You say, now wait a minute, why were we selected? And initially, the deal was a $12 million deal. And our balance sheet probably had maybe $1 million on the balance sheet at most. 2 years old, one deal underway, not completed. The reason we were selected, this is how ephemeral these things are, how much luck, serendipity, and how just all of the forces of the sun and the moon and the stars coincided to give us an opening. Billy Orkin was the owner of this land. Orkin was a famous storied name in Atlanta, Orkin Pest Control, which had sold out in '74 or '5 to Rollins, which was a much bigger public company. Billy and his two sisters had ended up committing their father, well, the father in a
brother too, Stanford.
Brother, okay, so it was two sisters and two boys, two girls. And the father, in an attempt to avoid estate taxes, had structured the business so that he had passed essentially full control off to the kids. Big mistake. And the kids had then taken the opportunity to commit the father to an insane asylum, and it took him over a year to get out with his lawyers. And during the year he was committed, they sold the business for major, I can't remember, but major money. Split it up 4 ways. So Billy is in receipt of a major amount of money. What Billy did with his money was virtually 100% of it, he bought raw land all around the Atlanta and greater Atlanta area, including these 400 acres right at Roswell Road there. And so Billy, it turns out, after he was in receipt of all this money, lost his head, had a weakness for the women folk, what he decided to do was kill his wife. And unfortunately, he selected Orkin rat poison to arsenic, and he laced her food, but he wanted to do it slowly and thought he could, if she died, he could have it where it just, she passed away and no one would know it was a heart attack, something like that. Well, that wife started to, I don't know exactly all the symptoms of overdosing on arsenic, but I guess it isn't good. In any event, this went on over several months and she started to deteriorate. In any event, collapsed at dinner one night. Took her to the hospital. Long and short of it was, they discovered the arsenic in her system, could chemically establish this arsenic came from Orkin rat poison, and ended up indicting Billy for attempted murder. Luckily for him, she survived. And he was sentenced to a Georgia state penitentiary to hard labor. Now, back in the 70s, hard labor was in fact hard labor, where you went out on a chain gang and worked every day. And I guess for a lot of it was a rock pile, like where you actually...
Down in a quarry.
Down in a quarry. I don't know all the particulars because it became so, so Billy's wife divorced him and they kicked him out of the country club and on and on and on. So Billy was the only, I'm told, 5'5" Jewish guy in this Georgia state pen with a population of other kind of people. So he became the plaything, of course, for the other folks, and it scarred him. He was really a different guy. I mean,
He became a little paranoid.
Oh, so to meet him.
He had a 5-year sentence. He copped a plea, and he served about 3.5 years, hard labor.
And he walked funny. You're in one of those places and you're not physically normal. So Billy,
I want you to know I've known Greg since 1971. No. This is the first time I've heard this.
No. Oh my God, Phil was at these meetings. So, and Billy had a broker named Ray Boyd, and when Ray would say, well, listen, the first time Phil and I went to meet with Billy, don't make any loud noises, and you got to be very careful. And he's still recovering from this ordeal of being in the Georgia State Pen. Okay, so we go to this building with no names, no anything, and there's a door, and it's a black door, and it's locked, and you knock on the door, and Billy opens the door, and then you quickly go in and close the door and locks it. So, I think, ooh, boy. But the long and short of this story is we had an edge. Billy refused to do business with anybody from Atlanta. The John Williamses and the Barry Tiggs and all the other big players in Atlanta had ostracized him after his conviction and had refused to talk to him or deal with him, and so he was shunned. And he wanted to deal with somebody who from outside of Atlanta and who didn't know him and would not, think bad things about him. And so it was and I'm able to take it up a notch or two with people of that ilk. So I was able to bond with Billy in a way that I don't think many, I get little credit for lots of things, but I bonded with old Billy. We'd laugh a couple of jokes and tell.
You told him about your experience in jail too.
I told him about your experiences in Vietnam. And so Billy's best friend was, what was the name of that guy? The guy got paralyzed, the penthouse guy. Larry Flynn. So Billy Orkin's best friend is Larry Flynn, who got shot.
We're heading towards salacious
I'm going to move on. But long and short of it is we got into the area where I was a little bit stronger. And so Billy and I hit it off. And he didn't ask one question about where was the money coming from or what's your experience. It was just incredible. And so we entered into this purchase and sale agreement to buy 400 acres at the time of dirt here on Roswell Road.
To talk a minute about having met Greg the first time, I met him in 1980.
No, 76. It was.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1977. That's when I started. 77. I'm sorry.
Was it 77?
Yeah, it was 77, and we met on the Union League basketball court. And I had heard about Greg. He had only been with Mayor Brown 2.5 years before he left. And yet in 2.5 years, he had left a litany of stories about parties, about questionable behavior that live in infamy way beyond the 2.5 years. And so I knew who he was. He was also the ringer on the Mayor Brown basketball court or basketball team. And each team was allowed one ringer who no longer was employed by the law firm. And so we had our first practice of the preseason, and Greg shows up, and I had played in high school and a little bit in college. And so people were looking to me to resuscitate the Mayor Brown team. And so I remember dividing up into shirts and skins, and the first time down the court, I thankfully swished a shot from above the foul line and turned casually. I wasn't pointing to the sky like guys do now, but I was acting cool and loped down the other side of the court, and I hear this labored breathing coming up behind me and footsteps stomping almost behind me. And as I look to my side, Greg comes up alongside me and elbows me right in the stomach as a parting shot to the rookie who was perhaps threatening his ringer status.
On John, he had a talent for resolving contentious and
without getting anybody mad at him.
He was empathetic. He could see the other parties. Now, on the separation with Mickey, even John had difficulty with Mickey because there was a $30,000 difference in what Mickey wanted versus what we thought was our bottom line. And I was tired. This was late at night, and I have always thought of myself as a decent gambler. So I told John, let's flip for it. We'll flip a coin. And Mickey either wins of 30,000 and John looked at me like I was an alien. You know, he could not imagine taking that sort of risk. So I think ultimately they split it in the middle or something close to it. But that gave me a better insight into John's makeup. I never suggested something like that again.
When I joined AMLI in 1985, I'd been on the board, but I hadn't really been deeply involved. And Greg and I met for breakfast, and he made me an offer, and I took it. But he said before it would be official, I would have to meet with John, and I would have to meet with Phil. And I said absolutely, and that sounded like a great idea. And John had me over to his home for a lovely dinner. And we sit and talked. And John was very candid. He said, "Why in the heck are you coming to AMLI? If I were you, I'd never do it." And we talked, and of course, I told him that I was really very interested in the process. And Greg and I had known each other since 1971, and so it wasn't in my mind like I was going somewhere where I didn't already know a lot. But then Phil said, he and Fran said, we should go out to dinner as well. And obviously—
A very polite invitation.
And Bonnie and I said, absolutely, of course. And true to form, Phil said, you do like different kinds of food, don't you? And I, oh, absolutely, pick anything you want. So Phil picked Mama Desta's Dead Sea Scrolls.
Red Sea.
Red Sea. I thought it was the Dead Sea. It was almost dead. The one lesson that I learned is if you're going to a restaurant that serves authentic food, don't go to the poorest country on earth. The authentic food was authentically dog food in the middle of a table.
You're desecrating Ethiopian food.
And the truth is, I got violently ill, and so did my wife. And it was barely able to talk the next day when I went into the office and said, Greg, I can hardly talk. I'm sick as a dog, but I still accept.
Phil represents the extreme left. Alan is to the right, and I'm closer to Alan than to Phil, that's for sure. And Phil moved from Chicago, and his wife is horrified, just horrified, moving from Chicago and Lincoln Park and the kind of, I mean, with lots of culture and educational trimmings and trappings, to Cobb County, the home of, what was the name of the congressman at the time?
Lester Maddox?
No, he was the governor. The congressman was John Bircher, and he got killed.
Yeah,
named the highway
McDonald. McDonald, the guy that got shot down in the Korea.
Yes. Yeah. So Phil is moving to literally the center of the world for the John Birch Society, out in this house in the hinterland.
Now, that's hardly all true, but but what was true was Mickey and his wife Donna, lovely person, so they were very good friends with the neighbors. And over time, we got to know the neighbors better, and after a while, they had told us that as a group, they had said, oh, Donna and Mickey, whatever you do when you move out, don't sell that house to no damn Yankee. And of course, we show up with our Ohio and Illinois flags and Union Army. And, but ultimately, we settled our differences, and they were lovely neighbors.
Buying apartments where you actually can say, here's the apartment, there's 300 units, and here's the rents, and here's blah, blah, is one thing. Buying blind pool land. Now, Will County was not blind pool, but anybody that went out there and stood there and looked around. And we were also saying we thought we could get an interchange. We were on I-55 and Weber Road, but there was no interchange at that time, nothing. So there was no way it was a bear. You had to get off of 53 to wind around to the site. So it was very cumbersome to get to the site. And we said in our offering materials in AMLI Will County, we had talked to IDOT, we were prepared to go in and seek to get an interchange, and we thought we could do it. I forget the words, Sweet probably came up with expeditiously. I forget exactly what word we came up with, but it was not timid. It was not fear-inducing. It was more inclined to say we felt pretty solidly that we could get an interchange. Well, luck would have it, we stumbled on Senville. If you took a look at the serendipitous, lucky things that happened, Well, that was the name of the development.
Oh, Senville
Senville
was the
was
company.
was the South Florida Savings and Loan, where the guy, when I went down to, there's a couple of meetings that stand out in my life, including the Orchid meeting, but this one I'm down in Miami at the headquarters of Senville, which was a South Florida Savings and Loan, with millions of dollars of paintings, millions of dollars of Moreaus and Picassos, that kind of stuff. And this guy wanted to build a gigantic empire of retirement living. And that was the Carillon development. And we sold out of the, whatever, 3,500 acres, I think we sold him 2,000 acres in one fell swoop. And as a condition of closing, we had to get the interchange. Well, with that little deal, every politician in Will County went nuts. So the Weber Road interchange went from pretty low on the totem pole to a critical, and it got built. I think we built it, actually got it built within 18 months of buying the land. So it was just way faster than anybody thought. Lomas and Nettleton. This is John at his finest. It's in a short, cryptic instance, describes how John was able to diffuse people and fix problems. We had done a significant amount of financing with Lomas and Nettleton. And I can't recall all, but it was a lot of relationships, including tax-exempt bond financing for a variety of apartments. Lomas and Nettleton in, I'm gonna just throw out there, 91, it might possibly 92, but possibly 90. It was 90, 91, or 92 in the savings and loan debacle. Lomas went BK, completely bankrupt. And that instance, the A rating went away and we were in default. We had
Our own credit was better than our credit enhancer.
yes. And in all those documents, which are this thick, there was no event of default by the credit enhancement party. All of it was, the onus was on us and all the horrible things would happen to us if we went bust, but if the credit enhancer went bust, there was nary a single word. So we had to do something. The bonds were in default, the interest rates spiked to some horrible rate. I can't remember, we were priced off of, it was a floating rate and some spread over some index. And whatever happened, the rates went up, multiple hundreds of basis points. I think it went into double. I think we were over 10%. I think we were 11, 12%. Tax exempt, up from 2 or 3%. So this was catastrophic. I mean, it took all the cash flow from the properties. Would have been just beyond. It would have been destructive. So John was the guy, of course, that was anointed to go down to Dallas to meet with. Kerry Wicklund was the president of Lomas and Nettleton. And Kerry had had a heart attack within the last year, and John had had his aneurysm, his brain, it wasn't a tumor, it was a clot. The clot in the head, I don't think it was a tumor, but it was a horrible blood clot in the brain, and he had had half his skull taken off. John was out for, I'd say, 6 months, really, recovering from this terrible health event. And so John goes down there, and it's AMLI Lore, and what the key was, Lomas was getting a fee, of course, for credit enhancing all these bonds and all this financing, and so we were asking them to give up this fee. We had no legal right to do that, but the bonds it was killing us. And they're in bankruptcy, so they had limitations on what they could do without the bankruptcy trustee getting involved and blessing whatever fees they're giving up. And John had concocted, and I cannot remember exactly what the fix was, how we got this expedited so quickly and outside of requiring bankruptcy approval, trustee approval. But John went down, and his opening lines were, Kerry, I want to, the challenge for us today is to establish that you, a banker, have a heart, and that me, a lawyer, has a brain.
Developer.
A developer has a brain, And we've got to fix this and fix it quick, because time is not our ally. And so Kerry laughed at that. And John was there, I can't remember, but I'm going to say late into the night, multiple lawyers involved, and got it drafted. And it was done literally in, I mean, my memory is 24, 48 hours. John came back with the deal fixed. And we had a substitute guarantor. We had the whole thing fixed very, very quickly. So the cost to us in terms of increased interest was pretty, I can't remember the dollar amount, but it was a hiccup, not a disaster. And I know all of us were beyond thankful that John had pulled this rabbit out of the hat.